Today we are going to talk about the excerpt from Walden by Henry David Thoreau. So I highlighted, as usual, my favorite passages, or the quotes, I shouldn't say my favorite, the quotes that I felt like sum up the message of the piece. So the first one is obviously the opening line. I went into the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. If you've ever seen the movie The Dead Poets Society, this is how they open their meetings. It's a very good movie, highly recommend it. So essentially, this is his rationale. So this would be coming from the first chapter of Walden. And it's his rationale for why he decided to go live in the woods for 2 years. And what he's saying in this quote is that he wished to live deliberately, like with purpose. So to get away from society and go into the woods would allow him to live with purpose, because what do you have to worry about? You just have to survive and enjoy. And see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. So he really, and in the rest of this paragraph, he went into the woods to kind of figure out life, because he got away from everything and he could kind of focus inward on himself, and he wasn't distracted by any of the, responsibilities, drama, etc. that living life in society brings. So that's the essence of passage 1. Passage 2 starts with, still we live meanly like ants, though the fable tells us that long ago we were changed into men. So he is referencing, Thoreau was for the intelligent reader. There are many allusions throughout the entire book, but specifically through this piece. So he's referencing a fable, and the image there is that we live like ants. So if you think of ants, you think of them kind of all working. That's all they do. They also walk in like a line and follow each other. There's a Dave Matthews song about the ants going marching one by one. So you kind of just like are in this, you do the same thing day after day. And the next part of this passage that I highlighted, simplicity, simplicity, simplicity. I say, let your affairs be as 2 or 3, and not 100 or 1,000. Instead of 1,000,000, count half a dozen, and keep your accounts on your thumbnail. So this is getting into kind of a minimalist approach to life. So simplify. If you have less stuff, less things to worry about, less tasks to complete, then your life will be fuller, because you're only worried about the small things that matter to you. And the line, keep your accounts on your thumbnail. Obviously, if you look at your thumbnail, it's quite small. So, Rowan, can you stop slurping your drink while I'm doing this? Oh my goodness. So, your thumbnail is quite small. So he's saying, like, simplify your life. Like, if we have too much stuff, too much to worry about, that causes bad things to happen, right? And then simplify. Instead of 3 meals a day, if it be necessary, eat but 1. Instead of 100 dishes, 5, and reduce other things in proportion. So this is actually something that I've seen recently. I feel like there was a documentary called Minimalist, and it goes into how to live like a minimalist life, because we really don't need all the stuff that we have. I'm actually staring into my children's playroom. They don't need 98% of the stuff. They don't need 100% of the stuff that's in there to survive. So Henry David Thoreau is just saying we need to simplify, live a simple life, because when we have too much stuff in our life, and that can be material items or worries or responsibilities, we tend to get away from what's really important. Okay. Then he gets a little political and talks about like luxury and excess. And could you imagine if Henry David Thoreau like saw an episode of Keeping Up with the Kardashians for 1 second? Okay, and kind of he's preaching against it. All right, in this next bit, he goes into discussing a couple of things: progress, and the latest progress in his time was the railroads, but it's also this idea of work, and specifically labor. So he let me start a little bit ahead of this quote. Men think that it is essential that the nation have commerce and export ice and talk through a telegraph and ride 30 miles an hour without a doubt whether they do or not. But whether we should live like baboons or like men is a little uncertain. So Thoreau was not a huge fan of technological advancements. He figured, why do we care about all of these things when we really should be focusing on what's right in front of us? Why do we need to travel 30 miles an hour? It's kind of laughable, but why do we need to go from place to place? Why do we need to, be in other people's business? Why do we need to communicate with people far away from us when our family is right here and the things that matter are right here in front of us? Okay. If we do not get our out sleepers and forge rails, so now he's talking about the construction of the actual railroad, and devote days and nights to the work, but go tinkering upon our lives to improve them, who will build railroads? This is kind of like a mind your business, focus on you message here. And then he gets a little sarcastic, and I love a good snarky moment. And if railroads are not built, how shall we get to heaven in season? Like, oh my God, if we don't build these railroads, how are we ever going to get into heaven? Like, it obviously has nothing to do with getting into heaven. How you get into heaven is by being a good person. So he's saying here, we need to work on ourselves. Why are we wasting time, building these railroads? Okay, and then he goes into this whole, we do not ride the railroad, it rides us. And it is basically, the image here is that the men who are working on the railroads he kind of paints this picture that they become the tracks themselves. And then they get buried and the trains run over them. And what's going on here is he's just basically arguing against getting so involved, and I think it could be anything, but specifically in your work, that you're not living, that your work is what's defining you. And of course, Thoreau would say that's not the way to live. I mean, we know Thoreau lost a couple of jobs and would not work for the pencil factory. So, but I agree with what he's saying here, because I mean, you want to do something, you don't want your work to kind of define your life. You want your life to be more full than just a career or a job. So I don't know, I guess that's food for thought for you guys, because you're thinking about what you want to do. And I think it's just important to find something that you absolutely love. So you're not letting your job sort of consume you, because it will take up a good deal of your life. Obviously, Thoreau would rather we not work at all, but we need to work. So, but he's saying here the dangers of the job taking over and consuming you, and that's not where the focus of your life should be. Okay. And then the next part, let me just check my time here. The next part is from the conclusion, so the final chapter of Walden. So I skipped